Hi folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of when rental income, whether it's rent on a domestic dwelling or rent on a restaurant premises or an office premises, commercial real estate, it's rent, and all that falls under that umbrella of rent for property in place. Once the cost of that, the rent that you pay crosses a certain equilibrium threshold, then new wealth is not being created. Wealth, whatever exists of wealth, is being stolen and concentrated in the hands of the property investor class and the banking and finance class of people and so on. So this means that other people can't really make money or making much less, and therefore money is in essence being stolen from those who have to pay rent to those who are receiving rent. And it's referred to generically as a rentier, rent, i.e. Rentier economy. And we can see it all around us today where new wealth is not being created, insofar as, if it is being created, it's being sucked up into, again, the property owning and banking class, who themselves are not creating new wealth. They're distributing it around, as in sending jobs offshore to India or something like that. But the rent that's being paid from particularly, the white sort of Western middle class type people, that rent is being extracted under it's effectively an extortion racket, I would argue. But let's have a look at an example of a restaurant. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, restaurants are now providing an inferior product, lower quality product, and piss poor service and so on. And whether this is a restaurant you go in and sit down and have a meal, or take out food, or fast food or anything, it doesn't really matter. We're seeing the same sort of thing. There are plenty of chain store takeout food restaurants where you're lucky if you can find someone that speaks even minimally competent English now. And it's automated, and they've got their checklist that they've been trained to follow. If anything happens that falls outside the checklist, and indeed the sequence of the checklist, they're screwed. They can't do it. There's maybe only one person in the whole restaurant that speaks passable English, and even then it's a chore to explain to them what's happened. So what's going on here? If we look at, in the United States, the chains like the Cracker Barrels, the list goes on of stores that have been chain stores, whether it be takeout food or restaurants, struggling, and many of them going out of business. Some needing to be rescued by, a lot of them. Then the venture capital sells that off and then walks away, having made their money from the real estate sales and the big fees. In some rare instances, they rescue the place and rescue the chain of restaurants, and then maybe they take it public or refloat it or make their money that way, and then they walk off and leave it to others. But nonetheless, they're let's just have a look at the just a general sort of restaurant. A restaurant operating 30 years ago, for example, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, that sort of thing, there was a ratio of rent that they would pay for the premises. So it's X amount of dollars per square foot, square yard, square meter, and that there were the various rates that we, depending on the area. So if you're in the the heart of the downtown area of the city with lots of foot traffic, the real estate was more expensive. You would pay more, but you got a lot more customers because of the amount of foot traffic and so on. Now, if I look at restaurant owners and small sort of takeout food owners and the proportion of rent that they were paying years ago to the proportion of rent they pay today, the rent has gone up nearly 20 times over the last 30, 40 years, whereas, wages have gone up half that amount over that time. Sure, population has increased, so they're getting, more sales, but the profit on each sale is being squeezed, as in just on profit at sales. But then when they look at the costs have increased, rent being the primary cost. So rent is, if you just do the hard numbers, it's twice as expensive as it was 30 years ago. So if the business is to remain viable, they have to find savings in other areas because they got so much rent to pay. So there's not many areas you can save money on. You can have an inferior quality product, and do things like you can bulk cook and then freeze it and then microwave heat it. You can do that, which means you're not supplying fresh food anymore, freshly cooked, freshly prepared food, which is part of your shtick. So instead of doing fresh cakes, you do a bulk bake or subcontract out a bulk bake to people that employ only slave peasant labor from the third world. It's frozen, bulk frozen, and then you just thaw it out or heat it up or whatever the case may be. So, we see that, say, with Cracker Barrel in the United States. They used to do these fresh biscuits, which were highly prized, but then they mass produced it, mass froze it, and just microwaved it. So it ceased to be fresh, and also it was an inferior product. And if you have side by side, in particular, the fresh product and then the frozen reheated product, there's quite a difference there. So an inferior product, but also inferior quality ingredients. That's a saving here. Now, if you're selling a certain amount of, I don't know, burgers or whatever it might be you're selling, and you can save 10 or 20 cents or something like that on the ingredients, then that adds up at the end of the day and end of the week, end of the month, and so on. So it's worth doing, but you get an inferior product. So there's a certain cheese that a company buys, the sliced cheese, and it's processed, but the amount of cheese in the product has decreased considerably to cheaper bullshit stuff ingredients, but it's cheaper, so they can still put what looks like cheese on the burger, but in reality, it's not the cheese that you were getting 20 years ago. So various savings can be made, but again, that's putting various people out of work. It's going to bulk handling, subcontracting out. The idea of the fresh, mama's home cooking and all that type of thing. No, that's gone. Now, so the next, ingredients and preparation and quality of product is an area where you can make savings, because now the rent is so high, you have to find savings somewhere else. There isn't enough new business or new customers, particularly not cashed up customers, because they're being squeezed by rent as well. So they're selling less. There'd be plenty of people that would buy lunch and get their sandwich or their burger or their pie or something like that at a bagel or something at lunch every day, and that's not so much now. So a lot of people are bringing sandwiches to work, or bringing bringing their salad in a plastic container, whatever it might be, but they're not spending as much. So there's less of the consumer dollar going around because they're being squeezed by rents. Or high mortgages, or we're going to call it, but we're talking about the rentier income side of things. So the next area where they can save money is on employees. So they only employ people of their racial group. So say you've got a Russian immigrant opens up a food shop. They only employ Russians. They may employ one non-Russian just to make it look good, but they only employ other Russians. Most of them are illegal. Most of them are getting unemployment, claiming unemployment to social security benefits, and they're working for cash under the table. Some of them are doing, they just get free meals, and they get a free breakfast and a lunch, and they get a generous dinner that they can take home for the family or something, and they're not really getting paid at all. So those sorts of scenarios are widespread in the food and restaurant and takeout food industry. Same be for Indians, only employing Indians, Greeks only employing family members. It doesn't matter. But but if you're a restaurant chain and you don't have that option, then you have to have lower quality employees. People covered in tattoos, with bad attitudes and missing teeth that are off their tits from blowing too many joints. And that's about all you can get. So the idea of being able to get these high quality, keen and eager, well-groomed, smiling kids that used to be working in no, that's you certainly don't see it anymore. If I look at one of the major international takeout food chains, and the store just nearest to where I live, the people in there, it's like their sole purpose is to prevent you from buying something. But the drive-through thing's not too bad, but the in-house service, in-store service is absolutely abysmal, and the attitude. Yeah, there's no keen, eager, smiling young faces in that place. Nor is there, and you'd struggle to find that anywhere in that chain store. And that chain store, that takeout food chain, was renowned for the keen, eager, clean-cut, smiling faces of the employees. So you start to look at savings by just getting lower quality people, and you don't lose the lower quality people so much. You got bright, go-ahead kids. They can get a better gig anywhere, or they could then, not now. Being highly qualified now is probably a disqualification for employment, but the lot of these places have got race, gender quotas and all sorts of things like that. So not being able to speak English and having a brown skin becomes a criteria for being employed, not a disqualification of any sort. So saving on people is one thing. Now, training's another. One of the international food chains were famous because they would give you a month of training, and some of this training was viewed by anyone who'd been through it as being excellent training and preparation for work. Work ethic in particular was something that was transmitted quite effectively there, and you're here to serve people and make their dining experience a pleasant one. Not now, where if the customer comes in, tell them to fuck off. Very different today. But this was so now that's gone now to 2 or 3 days instead of a month. And in some places they're even bypassing that, and they're just putting the new employee with someone who has some experience, and saying, we'll follow that person around for a day or two, then we'll let you loose on your own. So quality of training, quality of people, quality of attitude, that's gone. Now, some restaurant managers are saying, well, if I get a bright go-ahead kid, they're going to leave. Whereas if I get some third world peasant, they won't leave because they've got nowhere else to go, and I can treat them like shit and scream at them, and they'll take that. Whereas the bright young kid isn't going to take that sort of crap. So. And you look at something that develops over time with the management style and operational style of the business also goes downhill because they're dealing with a much lower quality person. They're dealing with people who, for economic reasons, they have to tolerate rather than people they would choose to hire. So the quality of management, the structure of management changes to the manager is dealing with illiterate peasants that'll try and skive off at any opportunity. And therefore, they treat the people like they treat them as if they're all sort of fresh out of prison and this type of, on day release from prison for murder or something. So this is the quality of management declines along with it. And when you look at the quality of the people who have been put in quite senior managerial roles in the food industry as an example, but elsewhere as well, the quality is mind-boggling. That chick who was put in as CEO of Cracker Barrel, seriously? And you're seeing this around the place. The quality has declined, and that everyone now is looking like a diversity, equity, inclusion hire. But all roads lead back to, and this is where I'm going with this, that all roads lead back to this rent. Once the rent passes the equilibrium threshold, the business can't really afford it anymore. The business is no longer viable. unless they break tax law, unless they produce an inferior product, they break employment laws, they hire peasants, they hire family members, they don't pay people the legally mandated hourly rate and hourly wage, and so on. So they can only go down that path, and it's still inferior service, inferior product, even after they've done those things. And that's what they're doing, and have to, and quite reasonably, by the way. I mean, it's, anyone placed in that circumstances would probably do something about the same, and that is to say, okay, the rent has gone up and up and up and up. Now rent is by far and away the greater part of the expense of running the business, whereas it used to be wages. The rent is by far and away the biggest cost of the business. So I've got to find savings elsewhere, and that's on employees. I hire less of them, I hire lower quality, I train them less. There are peasants I don't have to pay the legal wage to, and reduce the quality of the product or the size of the product. For example, there are places where the burger used to, you needed two hands to hold the burger. That's not the case today. I can easily hold that burger in one hand. And clearly the product is not only inferior, but it's quite a bit smaller. And so, they're making savings. And you see this in other areas. Say bars of chocolate as a case in point. They used to be, and I'll use round numbers here to illustrate the point, they used to be 100 grams. Now they're 70 grams, but they're the same price. So again, and they don't taste like they used to. So again, we're looking at a smaller product, inferior ingredients. So this is happening around the place. So the cost of rent, once it feeds out and permeates into the rest of the economy, all it does is allow great concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, but simply pushes that problem, makes it a problem for everyone else to have to adjust around, which is what we're seeing today. You've been Tacitus Today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.